think long and hard about whether to make this video or not, and in the end I came down on the side of doing it. I'm sure I've done one, at least one, similar in the past, talking about the various accusations that are made towards me, and I've done a blog post in the past about, Jesus, 5 years ago now, addressing a lot of the points that get brought up about me from a Tumblr post by Etin, a notorious goon and troll. I think it's just nice to have something where I get a chance to refute it, and I think it's better if I do it on video, because then, you know, you get a chance to pick up on the sincerity and the body language and the tone of voice and all of that stuff that can otherwise be missing. And I'm aware wearing sunglasses negates some of that, but I have a bit of a headache and there's bright sunshine coming through there. A lot of this, most of it, I guess, stems from this blog article I wrote back in 2012, maybe, which was entitled "In Defense of Rape." It wasn't in defense of rape. I mean, surely that should be obvious. I mean, I'm not Roosh V or something. I'm not going to be justifying actual rape anywhere. What the body of the article was about was defending free expression, artistic expression. This was all around the time of the Lara Croft reboot, and there was a scene with implied about to happen sexual violence in it, though it was never actually shown. And there was a big kerfuffle about that, and so that article was in part a response to that. It was intended to be part of a series. I would talk about torture, genocide, things like that. And I did do one follow-up article, which was actually penned the same day as the In Defense of Rape one. I think it was In Defense of Murder. But very few people read past the headline. Very few people seemed to grasp or understand what I was saying, and this was back in 2012, and things have gotten worse since then, in culture as a whole and in gaming in particular. And this resulted in things that seemed absurd at the time, but which have since become rather familiar, I think, to a lot of us. There were concerted attempts to cancel me, petitions to get Steve Jackson Games and Mongoose Publishing not to work with me anymore, even though I'd finished working with them at that point. Attempts to get products removed, a huge amount of hate mail, death threats, rape threats against my wife and myself, which was a bit hypocritical, I felt, but then probably there were a lot of trolls involved in what was going on as well, so you can probably ignore most of that. Still, that kind of set the tone for what was to come, and I hadn't really had much of a problem before that. There was a small fuss around Hentacle when it first came out. Some wag called it fetishized child rape or something, which is nonsense. But that was my first real taste of this problem, and then it continued from there. If you want to understand my behavior, I guess, the things that I do and why I do them, I think you have to understand that I'm very, very, very pro free expression. I think the harm principle is really the only justifiable grounds on which censorship should occur, and I believe that private censorship is a thing. Censorship doesn't have to come from the government. It's any suppression of thoughts, ideas, and expression at all. And I don't think we get to make a qualitative judgment on what is allowed and what isn't allowed when it comes to something so subjective as taste in writing or art, whatever else. That's a really dangerous road to go down. So if we're going to have the freedom to depict, say, rape, for example, in a book or a film or a TV show or whatever else, then we have to allow it for everyone. We have to allow the crass as well as the sublime. We have to allow for the badly handled as well as the well handled and sensitively handled, right? Free expression is really important to me. Really important to me. And also, yeah, I lived through the Satanic Panic, and that has a massive effect on me. Partly that's the same issue, but I was always extremely gratified by the unity of the gaming culture at the time in standing up against that kind of censorship and moral entrepreneurship that at that time was coming from the right. Okay, I am dyed-in-the-wool left wing, a left anarchist. I tried and failed to firebomb a Conservative Party headquarters when I was younger, and scared myself off any of that kind of direct action in doing that. I've got left-wing credentials. None of my ideas are right-wing, and yet I find myself in this day and age being constantly accused of various hatreds and phobias and whatever else, and some people seem to take the least charitable interpretation of work that I've done in order to shore up these accusations. Though these accusations never occurred spontaneously, it was only in hindsight and through a lens of looking for these kind of things that anyone ever found them, apparently. Now, I look back over my corpus of work, right, and the things that people seem to have made the biggest fuss about seem to be earlier work that I did for Mongoose, the card games, and the things that I've made in reaction to the woke mob, and my advocacy for people who are suffering at the hands of the woke mob. So my big break in games work in publishing, in freelancing, came when I wrote The Munchkin's Guide to Power Gaming with my writing partner Steve Mortimer for Steve Jackson Games, and that was a runaway success, which was weird, you know. It's a comedy book about role-playing. Who knew? All right, and that spawned D20 supplements, and then later on Munchkin, the card game, which you all know, and which I don't see a dime from, so don't worry, you can keep buying it. But that kind of got me set in this kind of comedy niche, comedy rut, and the kind of work I was being offered, you know, I was glad for it, but it was all this kind of comedy work, and I found that quite frustrating, intellectually and creatively. Now, while I did the Slayer's Guide to Female Gamers for Mongoose, that was funny, actually. Some American distributors said, "Oh, we don't want books about killing women," not realizing it was a comedy book. And then even those people who did realize it was a comedy book, or at least post hoc, seemed to think that the butt of the jokes were women, when the butt of the joke was that gamers and nerds are comically inept with women and come up with all kinds of fanciful ideas and fears and worries about women. That was the focus of the book. That was the joke, right? That dorks are dorky. Yeah, it's got kind of sophomoric humour, but there you go. I wrote another supplement for them, another comedy supplement, which was called Nymphology or Blue Magic, which kind of revolved around sexual magic. It was never intended to be used in play, though it could have been, and in fact was. There was a group that ran a kind of sex comedy, Magic University sort of game using that online, play-by-post sort of thing that was running for a while. Yeah, it was gratifying to see it used, but it was never really intended to be used. Now, at that point, I was starting to get a bit frustrated with all the comedy work. Though I did enjoy working on the D20 version of Macho Women with Guns, though they took out all my anti-Bush references and my anti-right-wing references from that. Go figure. but I was starting to get frustrated. I think that came through a bit in Nymphology, because beneath the comedy at a kind of secondary level was the consideration of how would magic be applied to sexuality, and where are these contradictions in what we find acceptable and what we don't find acceptable. Is it acceptable to summon a demon from the pit to fight a battle and maybe die for you? How is that better or worse than summoning a succubus from the pits of hell to fuck it? Right? And why is the violence acceptable and the sexuality not? And then looking at the real world, and how is technology used in its intersection with sexuality, and how would magic be used in its intersection with sexuality? Would people use it to spy on each other voyeuristically? Would people use it to summon things to fuck? Would people use it to make, literally walking dildos, animated statues, things like that they could fuck? What would happen? You look at the real world and you see how pornography often drives technology and so on, and yet this whole arena is missing in games. And that's another theme I guess I touch on a lot. Sexuality. It's such a key, important driving motivator for humanity, and yet it's almost entirely missing from games. And when even a hint is introduced, people lose their minds, but they're fine with murder and torture and slaughter, and yet the merest hint of sexuality and people go crazy. Even mildly sexualized depictions of characters, people go crazy these days. It just seems odd and weird. I mean, most of us like fucking, right? And a lot of fiction has idealized bodies or idealized sexual activity, and so on. So why is there this shyness? I mean, I know some of the reasons, but it's just a fascinating subject for me. That frustration, wanting to do serious work in these arenas, I think came to a head with Quintessential Temptress, which was intended to be another comedy book, but I was so frustrated at that point that it tried to come off serious but didn't quite, and I think it completely missed the mark as either a comedy book or a straight book. And there were excised sections which were meant to be kind of more jokey about Xena and so on, that I think overstepped the mark of even my sense of good taste. I think they released it separately as a PDF or something at that point. That was pretty much it as far as my work for Mongoose went. I kind of started working for myself a lot more. I hadn't worked for Steve Jackson Games since Munchkins. I'd done the odd spot of freelancing here and there for Wizards and so on, but that was about it. Then when it comes to my own material, of course, we ran into issues. Really starting with Hentacle, I suppose, though that wasn't censored until years later. So Hentacle is a tentacle porn card game. So it engages with these issues that I find interesting. There's sexuality there, there's censorship there. See, the irony, the beautiful irony in Hentacle being censored off Drive-Thru RPG is that the very existence of tentacle porn is down to censorship. The tentacles were a way of getting around showing erect penises, which weren't allowed to be shown. And I find the whole idea of tentacle porn inherently ridiculous. That doesn't mean it's not sexy, but it's just ridiculous. And the fact that it came about through censorship, it tickles me. So I made this pornographic card game based on that. And some people lost their minds at the time, but not enough for it to be censored. And then people looking back at it are taking it as some kind of endorsement of rape or something. I mean, these are drawings. They're not people. There's no advocacy there. It's mocking a niche of a niche. What's the what's the issue there? It's hard to comprehend how anyone would take that interpretation. And yet, Call of Cthulhu, which is my Cthulhu-themed one, which is Cthulhu porn with puns, basically terrible puns, that hasn't been censored, which is peculiar in and of itself. I think it was less explicitly rape than Hentacle was. I don't know. I don't think Hentacle was particularly explicit when it came to what was going on either. For all you knew, they were consenting. And there's this weird dichotomy in that if you approach sexuality from a woke point of view, if it's queer sexuality, that seems to be fine, seems to be lauded. But straight sexuality, if you can call tentacle sex, that doesn't get treated the same gentle way, I guess. It's all very strange to me. Then, I suppose, we get into the things that I made as a reaction to the abuse and attacks I was receiving, and my heightened awareness of woke culture. I make games about things that interest me, about things that I am involved in. So when I get dogpiled by a bunch of people trying to outdo each other with how much of a rick they can be, obviously that kind of dominates my thinking and sparks ideas and creates a surge of creativity in reaction to what is going on. Intentionally or not, that does seem to have triggered some people. I guess it's semi-intentional, intentionally poking the bear a little bit. Because I want to know the dimensions of the bear. I want to know how hypocritical the bear is, I guess. There's one card game called Privilege Check, which people seem to have a particular issue with, and that mocks the idea of the progressive stack. Now, as a dyed-in-the-wool leftist, I believe in equality and egalitarianism. We should treat everyone as equally as possible. We should provide as equal opportunities as we can for people. And I see the idea of the progressive stack as being a perversion of that. Rather than seeking to equalize everyone, this seems to be seeking to invert the old order and to create a new hierarchy within which the people with the biggest claim to oppression and hard times get to dictate to everyone else. To me, that's just recreating the problem and not solving the problem. So, as an old school leftist, I find this idea toxic and stupid and laughable, and my reaction to things that are like that is to take the piss out of them. So in Privilege Check, you basically have a hand of cards and a secret card, and you're trying to assemble an identity where everything is compatible, and you're trying to score the lowest amount of points possible. So you can think of it like bottom trumps or something. But this contains identities and little quotes, so indeterminate genders and so on. But the one card they all picked out is the brown card. So the brown card, you're some the identity is meant to be that you're some kind of nondescript, unidentifiable form of brown person. Not black, not South Asian, not Asian, but perhaps a mix or a less known race or something. And the little quote with it was something like, "You have to guess what I am, and if you get it wrong, you're in trouble." So, something like that. This came from the experiences of a friend of mine, a Guyanese woman. She's part white, part West Indian, part South Asian. Stunning woman. But she finds it funny that people can't peg where she's from, and they get so cagey about it. And there's a lot of colorism in Guyana as well. So the darker you are, the lower status you are, the lighter you are, the higher status you are. So she finds that doubly amusing. And it was based on her experiences and her stories that I made that particular card. And everyone loses their mind over it. I mean, it is funny. And you do have to be cagey. You do have to be careful. And it's also absurd to me because race isn't supposed to matter anymore. That was what we all used to be aiming for, was who cares what race you are? Why does it matter? Who are you as a person? That was what we were all aiming for. And now, weirdly, the left seems to be saying that your race is all important. You know, it must be at the absolute center of your identity, and your gender the same way, and your sexuality the same way. And I find that silly, and I make fun of it. And I find the idea of the progressive stack stupid, counter to left-wing values. And when I don't like things, I often make fun of them. So, you know, that's that, I guess. The Little Grey Book is a sort of one-page game, sort of a group storytelling activity, very story-gamey. And what you do is you play a character in a future dystopia, and the other players set you challenges during the day, and you have to try and negotiate those challenges in the most politically correct way possible, and everyone else at the table is trying to pick up on anything wrong that you do one way or the other. And it's impossible to succeed. Because whatever choices you make, there's always something wrong that someone can pick up on. So it's a game about being the least wrong, if it's about anything. And what it's really about is trying to show you that there is absolutely no pleasing the mob. That no matter how you act, whatever you do, you have the capacity to upset somebody. So it's a commentary, really, on modern internet culture, call-out culture, Twitter. It's one of my few overtly political games. And somehow, from the examples in that, they've taken that as being some kind of insult towards the disabled, or advocacy for, I don't know, wiping people out if they're genetically inferior or something. I don't really know how they spin that up out of it. Because that's not really what it's about at all, and it doesn't represent my views at all. So I honestly don't know where they're getting that from. I wrote a guide to dealing with these kind of social issues in the safe space age in games, you know, disability, sexuality, prejudice, and so on. Pundit thinks that was a troll. It wasn't. I did consult with friends from different races and cultures. They didn't want to be named because my reputation was being trashed and they were worried. So we used fake names for them that basically mean fake name in their native languages. And we put that book together about dealing with these subjects in games, because I have often felt, and I know they have often felt, that whitewashing game backgrounds, you know, making them, what does Pundit call it, fantasy Seattle, you know, with modern outlooks and so on, that does a disservice to people in the past. It creates unrealistic utopian societies with less conflict and hence less story. And we often felt that we wanted to deal with historical prejudice and bigotry, or fantasy bigotry. You know, it was big in Dragon Age, with the elves and so on. You know, we wanted to recreate something like that. So we put that book together between us that tackles those kind of subjects. People seem to think it was targeted at them or was meant to be about something else. I don't exactly know what their problem is. The other criticisms, I guess, that are aimed on me are more general. My involvement in Gamergate. Well, okay, you think it was a harassment campaign, and you think I was involved in harassment. I challenge you to find any examples of that. I was harassed, as a result of my involvement in Gamergate. I did get razor blades sent to my home address following a suicide attempt during Gamergate. That was nice. Thanks guys. And we just fundamentally disagree on what it was about, and so on. I agree there was trolling. I was trolled. People on the other side were trolled. But there were also a lot of sincere and honest actors involved. So that's just a point of disagreement, I guess. They call me a men's rights activist. Now, I have a lot of sympathy for men's rights activists. I think a lot of people who are involved in that sphere are good people. Though I don't necessarily like all the company that they keep. I think the Honey Badgers are good people. I think Elizabeth Hobson's a good person, smart cookie. Though I wish she wasn't involved with the Justice for Men and Boys group, or what's his name, the Conservative MP who keeps pushing for International Men's Day, which is a good thing, but he's a horrible, crazy person. Not the advocate I would choose. See, I believe in equality, right? And there are a lot of ways in which men are getting short shrift in society. I mean, this is just true. There's very little provision for men who suffer from the depredations of a violent partner. Rape of men isn't legally recognised. There's all kinds of issues. And a lot of the legislation that's brought in that's supposed to bring about sexual equality seems to be being applied one way. It's not to say women necessarily have it easy in every way, or that there aren't still issues to deal with there. But if the aim is equality, then I think we have to deal with these men's issues as well. So I don't consider myself a men's rights activist. I consider myself an egalitarian with a particular focus on men's issues, particularly because of my own mental health issues and how unsuited to men I have found the mental health provision in this country to be. I think at my most red-pilled, I may have told Justin Achille that he should just cut his cock off and offer it up on an altar to Athena if he felt that way about something. It was that kind of self-deprecating self-hatred that a lot of male feminists tend to go in for. I just find particularly aggravating. It caught me at the wrong time. But I don't consider myself a men's rights activist. I think the only thing that is left then is the fact that I have advocated for people like Kevin Rolfe, like Zach S., even spoke up for Sean Patrick Fannon for a while until he put out his confession. Ultimate irony is he came after me recently for sexism and so on after all the question marks around him. Woo lad, as the saying goes. That is being taken as me defending what these people are accused of, whether it be spousal abuse, sexual depredation, those kind of things. That's not it at all. If they're guilty, I think they should be punished. But we don't know if they're guilty in a lot of these cases, right? We simply don't. And the court of public opinion, the Twitterati, the online mob or whatever, they've targeted me in the past, and in my opinion, wrongly, due to misunderstandings and so on. So I am biased. I do have a personal vested interest in seeing justice be done. And so when I see someone else being attacked, whether they turn out to be guilty or innocent, I think we need to remember why we have due process in law, why we should not just outright cancel someone on the basis of a tweeted allegation within a matter of hours, right? I believe in innocent until proven guilty. I believe in not true until proven true, right? That this idea of believe the victim is very dangerous, in my opinion. You can't establish that they are a victim until you get to the truth of the matter, right? So how do you know that they're a victim? And does claimed victimhood somehow make someone infallible? They can't be wrong, whatever. These snap judgments, these mobs, they're dangerous, they're unjust, they bypass due process entirely. And there are problems with due process, I quite agree. And we need to address those. But we need to remember why those structures are set up in the way they are, why we consider someone innocent until proven guilty. So when these mobs happen, my instinct is one of caution, one of, take time. What are the facts? What are the facts? Lazarus Long. And if you don't have the facts, and if you don't know if someone is guilty or not, then the kind of wholesale life-destroying punishment that we're meting out on people is not justified. And I am worried that some accusation, however spurious, is going to end up ruining someone, and they're going to end up taking their life. Okay? Now, I'm sure other well-meaning people on the left will disagree with me on all kinds of things here. That they will think that the progressive stack somehow advances equality, or that creating prejudice against men advances equality. We disagree. It doesn't mean we can't communicate. I'm sex positive. I like transgression. I think porn should be available. I don't think it exploits women. I think, if anything, the other way around. There's all these things that, there are established differing camps, even within the left, on these issues. We should be able to communicate. It doesn't make me a right-winger that I disagree with you there. I don't think sexy is sexist. I think men have issues that are going unaddressed. That doesn't mean women don't have issues too. And I believe in the logic behind due process. And I mock things that I find stupid, and that seems to be, that and my interest in sexuality seems to be where all the hatred comes from, and I just think it's misplaced. If you disagree with me on this stuff, I want to have conversations with people. I want to understand where you're coming from. I don't want to just be insulted and blocked. So if you're up for it, let me know. Zang.
They